The rain beat hard against the windows, a soft, rhythmic sound that made the room feel even cozier. Chinyere sat in the middle of her friends, the bright orange candlelight flickering and casting shadows on their faces. They were a close-knit group, bound by friendship, secrets, and laughter. Tolu, ever the prankster, had brought up the idea. Let's play a game of truth or dare. Chinyere, Sade, Jide, and Ikenna exchanged excited glances. They all loved Tolu's bold ideas, and even though some of her dares were wild, none of them could ever say no. But tonight felt different, as if the rain and the night had cast a spell on them, making them bolder and less careful. Tolu started, turning to Sade with a wicked grin. "Truth or dare?" she asked. Sade, the shyest of the group, bit her lip and muttered, "Truth." Tolu laughed. "Who do you have a crush on?" she asked, her voice full of teasing. Sade blushed, looking down, but eventually whispered, "Ikenna." A wave of surprise rippled through the group. Ikenna looked stunned, his eyes darting away from her, clearly unprepared for this revelation. They all laughed, the tension broken for a moment, but Chinyere couldn't shake off the feeling that this game was about to reveal more than anyone was ready for. The next turn went to Ikenna, who picked dare, just to avoid more uncomfortable questions. Tolu smirked. "I dare you to message your ex and tell her you miss her." The group gasped in delight, knowing how awkward this would be. Ikenna hesitated but finally took out his phone and sent the message, looking away as they teased him. Then it was Chinyere's turn. She picked truth, hoping for something light, but Tolu's eyes glinted with mischief. "Tell us your biggest secret," she challenged. Chinyere froze. She had many secrets, but one she held close, one she couldn't share with anyone. Her heart raced as she thought of how to dodge it. She stammered, but she felt the pressure of everyone's eyes on her. "I like writing poetry," she finally said, knowing it wasn't really a big secret but was true enough to pass. But Tolu wasn't satisfied. "Is that really your biggest secret?" she prodded, but Chinyere shrugged it off, pretending she didn't care. The game moved on, each person's turn growing bolder. Little secrets started coming out, and hidden feelings began to rise. Jide admitted he had been jealous of Ikenna, and Tolu confessed she once lied about a test score. Small things, all playful, yet each person felt the game pulling them deeper, forcing them to let go of things they had hidden. Then came a strange turn. Jide looked at Sade and, with a mischievous look, dared her to pick up a red book sitting on the shelf nearby and open to any page. Sade looked confused. "That old book." "Why?" she asked. But Jide insisted, and Sade shrugged, reaching for it. She flipped it open, and her eyes widened. "This is not mine," she whispered, recognizing the handwriting as her mother's. Chinyere leaned in, curious. "What does it say?" Sade read aloud, "Secrets of those who have wronged me will never go untold." Her voice trailed off as she read the next line to herself, and her face turned pale. She closed the book quickly, muttering that it was just a family thing, but they could all tell something in her shifted. The rain seemed to pour harder as they continued, and Tolu dared Jide to say what he truly thought of each person in the room. He hesitated but, spurred by the dark mood of the night, began sharing his thoughts, raw, unfiltered, and surprising. "I think Tolu always wants to be the center of attention," he started, and Tolu laughed, brushing it off. But he went on, telling Ikenna he thought he was too quiet and called Sade too cautious. When he got to Chinyere, he paused, his eyes reflecting something deeper. "Chinyere, I think you're hiding something big. You act brave, but there's more going on. You're scared of being seen for who you really are." The room fell silent. Chinyere felt exposed, as if Jide had looked straight into her heart. She wanted to say something, but no words came. Instead, she forced a laugh, deflecting the weight of his words. "Okay, enough with the truth," she said. "Let's go back to dares." But as the night wore on, the game took on a life of its own, revealing secrets no one expected to share. When it was Ikenna's turn again, he dared Sade to go outside and count the stars. She laughed, thinking it was harmless, and stepped out onto the porch, looking up. But a chill ran through her as she noticed something strange, a figure standing far off in the shadows, watching her. She ran back inside, her face pale, but when she tried to explain, her friends just laughed, thinking she was spooked by the game. But Chinyere couldn't shake off the feeling that something dark had entered their night. The game turned uneasy after that. Each turn became sharper, more invasive. Secrets that were shared as jokes now lingered like a curse. Chinyere dared Jide to go to the mirror and say the name of the person he feared the most. He went, reluctant, and whispered, "My father." His face fell, haunted, as if he'd said more than he intended. They were all drawn into the game, like flies to a flame. And as the clock struck midnight, Tolu dared Chinyere again, this time challenging her to reveal what she feared most. Chinyere hesitated, feeling the weight of everyone's gaze. "My biggest fear is losing everything I have," she admitted quietly, her voice barely audible. She knew her friends would assume she meant her material things, but only she knew it was her heart, her trust in others. Just as she spoke, a loud crash echoed through the room. The lights flickered, then went out, leaving them in darkness. The room was swallowed by darkness, and the rain outside roared even louder. Shadows shifted as the single candle on the table wavered, barely illuminating the group's faces. Chinyere's heart raced as she looked around, feeling the tension in the air grow thick. Tolu laughed nervously, breaking the silence. "All right, who's messing with us?" she said, but no one responded. Her laughter faded as she realized that everyone was as tense as she was. The air felt charged, almost suffocating, as if the room itself held a secret it wanted to reveal. Then, there was a soft thud from the other side of the room, where the bookshelf stood. Sade, her voice trembling, whispered, Did you hear that?" No one moved, frozen by an unspoken fear. But finally, Ikenna, always the bravest, stood up, squaring his shoulders. "I'll check it out," he said, his voice low but steady. As he approached the bookshelf, the flickering candle cast eerie shadows on the wall, making everything look more sinister. He reached out slowly and touched the shelf, his fingers tracing the edge of the old red book that Sade had read from earlier. Suddenly, the book fell from the shelf with a loud bang, making everyone jump. It opened to a page near the middle, and something caught Chinyere's eye, a folded piece of paper tucked between the pages. Ikenna picked it up, his hands trembling slightly as he unfolded it. The words were scrawled hastily, almost as if someone had written them in a hurry. "Whoever opens this book, beware. The game isn't just a game." Ikenna read the words aloud, his voice barely a whisper. The group sat in stunned silence, each one processing what it could mean. Chinyere's mind raced. Was this some kind of prank? Or had they somehow stirred something that had been hidden for years? Jide laughed nervously, trying to break the tension. "All right, Tolu, good one. You're really going all out with this joke, huh?" But Tolu looked genuinely confused. "I didn't do this," she said, her voice barely audible. "I thought it was you guys trying to scare me." The uneasy silence returned, heavier this time, as if the room were pressing down on them. Each friend looked at the others, suspicion creeping into their minds. Could it be possible that one of them was trying to manipulate the game to reveal secrets? Chinyere couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched, a presence hovering just outside the circle. She wanted to say something, to call off the game, but a part of her felt trapped, as if the game itself was forcing them to continue. With trembling hands, Sade pulled out her phone to check the time. "It's almost 1 in the morning," she whispered. Maybe we should stop." But Tolu shook her head, her eyes strangely determined. "No. We started this game, and we have to finish it. It's just a game, right?" The others exchanged glances, fear mixing with a strange sense of obligation. They nodded slowly, some out of curiosity, others because they didn't want to appear weak in front of their friends. Tolu looked at Ikenna, forcing a playful smile. "All right, your turn. Truth or dare?" Ikenna hesitated, his eyes flickering back to the ominous red book. "Dare," he said finally, his voice unsteady. Tolu thought for a moment, her gaze almost cold, calculating. "I dare you to go down to the basement alone and stay there for 5 minutes." Ikenna's face paled. The basement was known to be dark, filled with old furniture and unused supplies that cast long, eerie shadows. But he didn't want to show his fear. He stood up, took a deep breath, and walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing down the hall. The remaining 4 sat in silence, each one lost in their own thoughts. The moments stretched, each second feeling like an eternity. Then, just as the silence grew unbearable, they heard a loud, frantic pounding coming from the basement door. "Let me out!" Ikenna's voice shouted, filled with terror. "Please, let me out!" Sade jumped up, her face pale. "Did he lock himself in?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jide ran to the basement door, pulling it open, but found no one there. The basement was empty, silent, as if Ikenna had never gone in. A chill ran down Chinyere's spine. They all staircase, but there was no sign of Ikenna, no sound of footsteps. Sade clutched her arms, shivering. "Where did he go?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Before anyone could answer, their phones buzzed simultaneously. Each one picked up their phone, staring at the screen in horror. It was a message from Ikenna's number. "I'm watching you." A collective gasp escaped them, and Tolu dropped her phone, her face drained of color. This can't be real," she stammered, her hands shaking. Just then, the door creaked open, and Ikenna walked back in, looking dazed. He stared at them with wide eyes. "Hey, I don't know what happened," he said, his voice weak. "I went down to the basement, but it was like I was somewhere else." Everyone stared at him, too shocked to speak. The atmosphere was thick with fear, each of them trapped in a nightmare that felt too real. Chinyere finally found her voice. I think this game isn't just a game anymore," she whispered, her voice barely audible. They all exchanged fearful glances, the weight of her words sinking in. None of them knew what was happening, but one thing was certain. The game had crossed into something dark, something they couldn't control. As the candle flickered, casting their faces in ghostly light, they felt an invisible bond pulling them forward, like puppets tied to an unseen string. The tension was thick, the air almost suffocating as the group sat, their faces pale and their bodies rigid with fear. The rain outside had slowed to a drizzle, but the silence in the room was louder than any storm. Chinyere's hands trembled as she clutched her phone, trying to process what had just happened. She could still see Ikenna standing there, dazed, but there was something different in his eyes. He looked like himself, but his gaze was distant, as if he wasn't fully present. Tolu broke the silence, her voice barely more than a whisper. "We should end this game. Whatever is happening, it's not right." Sade nodded quickly, her eyes wide with fear. "I agree. We didn't sign up for this. This isn't a game anymore." But Jide hesitated, his gaze fixed on Ikenna. "Are you okay, man?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady, but there was a quiver in it. Ikenna nodded slowly, though his eyes didn't meet Jide's. I think so," he replied, but his voice sounded hollow, as if he were speaking from far away. "I don't know what happened down there. It was like I was lost in a place I couldn't understand." The others exchanged worried glances, each of them feeling the same creeping dread. They wanted to leave, to abandon the game and never speak of it again, but a strange force seemed to hold them there, urging them to finish what they had started. Jide finally broke the silence, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe we're just scaring ourselves," he said, trying to inject some levity. "Let's just finish one more round, and then we can call it quits." "Agreed." Reluctantly, everyone nodded, though no one looked convinced. They all felt it, that pull, that strange compulsion that made them stay seated despite their fear. Chinyere took a deep breath, glancing around at her friends. "Okay," she whispered. "One last round." She turned to Tolu. "Truth or dare?" Tolu swallowed, her voice shaky as she replied, "Truth." Chinyere thought for a moment, then asked, "What's the worst thing you've ever done to a friend?" It was a question that seemed innocent enough, but there was a weight to it, as if Chinyere herself didn't understand why she'd asked it. Tolu hesitated, her eyes flicking around the room before settling on her lap. I once told Sade's boyfriend a lie about her. I told him she was seeing someone else. I just wanted him to notice me instead." A stunned silence fell over the group. Sade's face twisted in hurt and disbelief, but she said nothing, her hands clenching into fists on her lap. The revelation hung in the air like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over their friendship. Before anyone could react, Ikenna spoke up, his voice low and strange. "Truth or dare, Chinyere?" Chinyere's heart pounded. Something about his voice didn't feel right, as if it were someone else speaking through him. But she swallowed her fear and whispered, "Dare." Ikenna's lips curled into a small, unsettling smile. "I dare you to go up into the mirror at your reflection and say, 'I am ready to know the truth.'" Chinyere felt a chill crawl down her spine. She wanted to refuse, to leave the room and never look back, but her feet carried her toward the stairs almost as if they had a mind of their own. She could feel her friend's eyes on her as she ascended, each step heavier than the last. The upstairs hallway was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon filtering through the window. She walked slowly to the mirror at the end of the hall, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear herself breathe. She stood before the mirror, her reflection barely visible in the dim light. Her own eyes looked back at her, filled with a fear she couldn't shake. Taking a deep breath, she whispered, "I am ready to know the truth." For a moment, nothing happened. She felt foolish, standing there in the dark, whispering to her reflection. But then, her reflection began to change. Her face twisted into an expression of fear, and her reflection's eyes widened, staring back at her with a look of terror. Chinyere's heart raced as she tried to pull away, but her feet felt glued to the floor. Her reflection's mouth opened, mouthing silent words, and Chinyere felt a strange, cold presence filling the room. She wanted to scream, to run, but she couldn't move. Then, her reflection spoke, its voice echoing in her mind rather than in her ears. "The truth is hidden within you, but it will come to light. You cannot escape it." Her reflection faded, returning to normal, but Chinyere felt as if something had taken hold of her. She stumbled back, breathing heavily, her heart racing. She could feel something dark, something she didn't understand, lingering in the air. She ran back downstairs, her face pale as she rejoined her friends. They looked at her in silence, their faces reflecting the same fear that gripped her. No one said a word. They all knew that whatever they had started that night, it wasn't over. The room felt colder, heavier, as if the house itself were holding its breath, waiting for the next move. Finally, Jide whispered, "I think we need to end this. Now." But just as he said it, their phones buzzed again, each of them receiving the same message at the exact same time. The game doesn't end until the truth is revealed. The words sent a chill down their spines, and they exchanged terrified glances. There was no way. The game had taken on a life of its own, and until each of them faced their darkest truth. Her voice looked at each, frightened. What do we? No one. They wouldn't let them. Deep down knew that the truth waiting to be uncovered was far darker than any of them could imagine. In silence, they sat, each haunted by their secrets, each bound by a dark force that refused to let them go. The night was far from over, and the game was only just beginning. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy, as if the house itself were holding its breath. The air felt charged, electric, like the moments before a storm. Chinyere clutched her arms, feeling a shiver crawl down her spine. She looked around the room, seeing the same haunted fear mirrored on each of her friends' faces. Then, as if breaking an invisible spell, Jide spoke up, his voice low and urgent. "We need to get out of here. Whatever this game is, it's not normal." The others nodded, a flicker of hope in their eyes, but as they moved toward the door, a strange resistance seemed to hold them back. It was as if an unseen force was pushing against them, trapping them in place. Chinyere tried to lift her foot, but felt it rooted to the floor, like the house itself was refusing to let them go. Sade clutched Jide's arm, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Why can't we move?" Jide shook his head, panic flickering in his eyes. I don't know. It's like something's keeping us here." A soft laugh echoed through the room, faint and chilling. The friends froze, glancing around, but there was no one there, only the empty, dark corners of the room, and that unshakable sense of being watched. Chinyere's heart raced as she looked at her friends, trying to find reassurance in their faces, but all she saw was the same fear she felt reflected back at her. Just then, her phone vibrated in her pocket. She hesitated, fear gripping her, but she pulled it out anyway. It was a message from an unknown number. "The only way out is through." She showed the message to the others, their faces growing paler as they read it. Tolu shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. No, this can't be happening. This is just some sick prank." But Chinyere knew deep down that this wasn't a prank. There was something malevolent here, something that wanted them to confront whatever secrets they'd been hiding. She took a deep, shaky breath and looked at her friends, her voice steady despite the fear churning inside her. Maybe we need to play by its rules." The others stared at her, horrified. Sade shook her head vehemently. "No, we can't let this thing control us. We should fight it, not give in." But Chinyere felt a strange calm settle over her, an instinct whispering that the only way out was to face whatever the game wanted them to confront. "I don't think we have a choice," she said softly. "It said the truth has to be revealed. Maybe that's the only way it will let us go." A heavy silence fell over the group as they processed her words. Finally, Ikenna spoke up, his voice barely a whisper. "If we do this, we stick together, right?" Chinyere nodded. "Yes." "No more secrets." Reluctantly, the others agreed, each one feeling the weight of the unspoken secrets they'd kept from one another. The tension was thick, their bond fragile, and each of them wondered if they would still be friends when this night was over. Taking a deep breath, Jide broke the silence, looking at Chinyere. "If we're going to do this, then we might as well get it over with. Chinyere, truth or dare?" Chinyere's heart skipped a beat. She knew that her choice now would shape whatever dark forces were at work here. She felt an overwhelming compulsion to choose truth, as if the game itself was guiding her. "Truth," she whispered. Jide looked down, his face a mixture of sadness and guilt. "Chinyere, I have to know. Did you ever betray me, even once?" The question hit Chinyere like a punch. She stared at him, guilt clawing at her heart. She hadn't wanted this to come out, not like this. But there was no way around it now. Swallowing hard, she nodded. "I did, Jide. I'm so sorry. Remember last year, when you thought someone stole your project idea? It was me. I was jealous." Jide's face contorted in pain, but he nodded, as if he'd suspected all along. Whispered, hurt filling his voice. "Afraid of losing your friendship. Afraid of facing myself." A tense silence filled the room, but then something strange happened. The heavy feeling around them lifted, just a little. It was as if the house itself had relaxed slightly, as though it had been holding its breath alongside them. Sade, seeing this, took a deep breath and whispered, Maybe it's working. Maybe if we keep going, this will end." One by one, they took turns. Each friend revealed something painful, something they'd hidden, something that had been festering in the dark corners of their hearts. Tolu admitted to betraying Sade out of jealousy. Ikenna confessed to lying about a friend, damaging his reputation to make himself look better. And Sade revealed that she'd known all along about Tolu's betrayal and had secretly wished something bad would happen to her. With each confession, the oppressive weight in the room seemed to lighten, as if whatever force had trapped them was loosening its grip. Finally, it was Jide's turn. He's filled with fear. There's something I've never told any of you," he said, his voice trembling. "Something that's haunted me for years." The others waited, tension mounting, as Jide struggled to find the words. He looked down, unable to meet their eyes. "When I was younger, I did something terrible. I was responsible for an accident that hurt someone close to me. I never told anyone because I was afraid. But I could live with it, but it's been eating me up inside." As he finished speaking, the room seemed to exhale, the air clearing, the oppressive presence dissipating. The tension in their bodies eased, and they felt a strange sense of peace settle over them. It was as if the game had been satisfied, its hunger for truth sated. For a moment, they sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The game had forced them to confront their darkest secrets, but in a twisted way, it had also brought them closer together, showing them the power of honesty and kindness. Chinyere finally broke the silence, her voice soft but steady. "Maybe that's what it wanted all along. For us to face ourselves, to be honest with each other." The others nodded, understanding dawning in their eyes. They'd come to the house seeking fun and adventure, but they'd found something far deeper, a confrontation with the parts of themselves they'd been hiding. As they gathered their things, preparing to leave, a feeling of calm washed over them. The game was over. Whatever force had been at work was gone, leaving only this of the night. They walked out of the house together, the bond between them stronger than it had ever been. They had faced their fears, their secrets, and their guilt, and in doing so, they had freed themselves from the shadows that had haunted them. As they stepped into the cool night air, they each felt lighter, as if they'd left something dark and heavy behind. The house loomed quietly behind them, a silent witness to the night's events, holding its secrets in the shadows. But just as they reached the gate, Chinyere glanced back one last time. In the upstairs window, she saw a figure watching them, shadowy and indistinct, but unmistakably real. A chill ran down her spine, a figure raised a hand, as if in farewell, or perhaps as a warning. The others turned to look, but by the time they did, the figure was gone, leaving only the empty, dark window staring back at them. And in that moment, they knew that some games never really end. The quiet streets felt surreal as they walked away from the house, the eerie events of the night leaving an imprint on each of them. They had spoken their truths they'd hoped for. The image of the shadowy figure lingered in their minds, haunting them with questions they couldn't answer. Days passed, and they tried to return to normal life, but something had shifted in each of them. The confessions they'd made still hung in the air, affecting their friendships in subtle ways. Tolu and Sade barely weight of their betrayal. Jide withdrew from the group, haunted by the guilt of his past, and Chinyere found herself unable to shake the feeling that they hadn't truly escaped. The shadow lingered in her thoughts, appearing in dreams that felt too real, too vivid. She'd wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, remembering those cold, dark eyes watching her from the window. Her dreams grew more disturbing over time, taking on a life of their own, as if something was trying to communicate with her from beyond the veil. One night, unable to sleep, she decided to confront her fears and visit the house again. She needed closure, an answer, anything to shake off the dread that had embedded itself into her life. She texted Jide, asking him to meet her at the house. Hesitant but unable to refuse, he agreed, sensing that he needed closure too. The streets were quiet as they approached the house, the air thick with an unnatural stillness. Jide looked uneasy, glancing at Chinyere with worry. "Are you sure about this?" She nodded, though fear churned in her stomach. "I have to know. I feel like it's not over." They entered cautiously, the old wood creaking beneath their feet. The rooms were empty, but the silence was too intense, like a pressure building in the atmosphere. They walked around, peering into rooms, half expecting to see that shadowy figure lurking in the corners. But everything was still, lifeless. As they made their way to the living room, they found an old book lying on the table. It hadn't been there before. The book's leather cover was worn, the edges frayed, and there was a strange symbol etched into its surface, a twisted figure, half human, half shadow. Chinyere hesitated, her heart racing as she picked it up. Flipping through the pages, they found passages in script. Most of it was illegible, but they could make out fragments, words that sent chills down their spines. The game is a mirror, a truth and releases. Those who enter must confront their own shadows. Then, at the bottom of a page, a chilling sentence was scrawled in larger letters. "You may leave, but the shadows stay with you." Chinyere's hands trembled as she closed the book, a deep dread settling over her. She looked at Jide, fear mirrored in his eyes. "What does it mean?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Before she could respond, they heard it, a faint sound, like footsteps echoing from the hallway. They froze, their breath hitching as they listened. The footsteps grew louder, closer, their necks stood on end. They could feel a presence approaching, dark and suffocating. Without thinking, they bolted for the door, their footsteps echoing down the hall as they ran. But as they reached the threshold, Chinyere felt an invisible force pulling her back, as if something had latched onto her, refusing to let her go. Jide grabbed her arm, pulling her through the doorway, and they stumbled outside, gasping for breath. They didn't stop running until they were far from the house, its ominous silhouette fading into the dark. When they finally stopped, Chinyere looked back, her heart pounding. She didn't see anyone following, but she felt it, that cold, dark presence lingering, as if it had attached itself to her soul. The words from the book echoed in her mind. "The shadows stay with you." They hadn't escaped. The truth they'd uncovered had left a mark on them, one that wouldn't fade easily. And as they stood there, catching their breath in the dead of night, they realized they hadn't come away from that house alone. Something had followed them. In the days that followed, strange things began happening. Shadows seemed to linger longer in the corners of their vision. They'd hear faint whispers, feel cold drafts, and see movement in mirrors when no one else was around. Each of them, now isolated by fear and guilt, faced these experiences alone, unable to talk to the others, each convinced they were slowly losing their sanity. Chinyere tried to ignore it, to convince herself it was all in her mind. But one night, she received a message from an unknown number, a single line that made her blood run cold. The game is not over. She knew then that whatever they had awakened in that house wasn't done with them. The shadows would follow them, haunting them, waiting for them to play again.